They laughed when the short-legged Mustang stumbled into the auction ring, laughed so loud it nearly drowned out the auctioneer. Built like a mistake, someone shouted. But just as the final insult landed, a sound cut through the chaos. A cane tapped the metal railing, and from the back of the crowd, an old cowboy stepped forward, slow, silent, and staring straight at the horse no one wanted. He didn't say much, he just looked, and when he moved, the whole room forgot how to laugh, because what he saw wasn't broken. It was familiar. The gate creaked open like it didn't want to. Dust swirled at the threshold, and for a second no one moved. Then the handlers shoved him forward, a squat, stocky Mustang with legs too short for the rest of him, like someone had pressed pause before he finished growing. His mane was tangled, and one ear flicked uncertainly, but he didn't resist. He just walked like he was used to being watched wrong. The crowd saw him and roared. Looks like a mule tried to be a horse and gave up halfway, someone shouted. Another voice chimed in. He's built like a toolbox, square and useless. Laughter rolled through the stands. Kids pointed. Grown men elbowed each other. A woman near the fence looked away, half snickering, half ashamed. The Mustang didn't flinch. He stood there, dusty and calm, eyes scanning the faces like he'd seen worse. He probably had. "All right, folks, quiet down now," called the auctioneer, tapping his gavel against the rail like it mattered. Lot 42, 4-year-old gelding, strong back, eats well, little, unorthodox, but he's sound. He waited, nothing. "Ain't nobody looking for a mascot," someone muttered. "Come on," the auctioneer tried again, voice thinning under the heat and the ridicule. "Good hooves, steady gait, he's just different." The crowd didn't hear him, or didn't care. A boy mimicked the horse's gait beside the pen, over-exaggerated, stumbling like a clown. More laughter. The Mustang blinked once, lowered his head. Minutes passed. The auctioneer's voice faltered. "No bids?" he asked, as if he couldn't believe it. Not because the horse was valuable, but because even meat buyers stayed silent. "Guess even the dog food plant has standards," came a low chuckle from the side. The auctioneer wiped sweat from his forehead and looked toward the handlers. "All right, let's move him out." But just as they reached for the rope, something shifted in the crowd. Not noise, silence. From the back, where the shade swallowed faces, a slow, deliberate tap echoed off the metal rail. Tap, tap, a cane, and then, from the dust and shadow, an old man stepped forward. Worn hat, denim coat faded near white, and boots that hadn't been shined in years. His face was carved with time and sun, but his eyes were sharp. He didn't speak, didn't laugh. He just looked at the horse, and the horse looked back. No one said a word, not because they understood, but because something about that gaze, quiet and steady, made the whole ring feel suddenly smaller. The auctioneer opened his mouth, but the man just raised one hand. One bid, and that was enough. He stood near the fence post, just outside the tarp's reach, where the sun hit hard, and the voices didn't quite carry. Most folks hadn't even noticed him. Just an old man in a sun-bleached coat, hands resting on a cane, polished smooth from years of leaning. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, they never left the Mustang. The laughter didn't reach him, not really, not the way it reached the horse. People threw words like stones, certain nothing could feel them, but the old cowboy saw the way the Mustang's ears shifted, not in panic, just in quiet resignation, like he'd heard it all before, and each joke landed in a place already bruised. He'd seen that look once before, a long time ago. It wasn't the legs that caught his attention, or the strange frame, or the way the horse moved like he was used to being stared at. It was the stillness, the kind that doesn't mean fear, the kind that means endurance. Years back, during a cattle drive up through Kansas, he'd had a horse with the same eyes, not the same shape, not the same gait, but the same steady fire, buried deep, behind skin and bone and silence. That horse had been laughed at too, until a storm rolled in, and the ridge gave way, and everyone panicked, except the one they called useless. He'd made it out alive, because of that animal, and he'd never seen him again after that night. Now, here stood another one, wrong size, wrong build, but something about the way the horse blinked, slow, steady, unbothered by noise, told him that maybe fate wasn't done yet. The crowd didn't see it. They were too busy making noise to notice quiet, but Silas did. He didn't need to say much, never had. He'd watched men talk themselves into corners and horses get trained into fear. He'd learned early that what matters most doesn't announce itself, it just shows up, silent, rough-edged, and waiting to be chosen. And that horse, that odd, unwanted thing in the center of the ring, he wasn't waiting to be saved, he was waiting to not be abandoned. Silas shifted his weight, eyes narrowing just slightly. The jokes didn't matter, the people didn't matter, even the auctioneer didn't matter. What mattered was that the horse hadn't flinched, hadn't bucked, hadn't begged. He just stood, dignified, dusty and alone. Silas leaned forward, his hand tightening around the cane. He didn't see a broken horse. He saw a mirror, and he wasn't about to let it walk away. The handlers moved in, ropes ready. The auctioneer gave one last half-hearted plea. Strong back, solid frame, eats less than most. Calm on now, someone. But even he sounded tired of trying. Dust swirled as the horse shifted his weight. One back leg cocked, eyes half lowered like he already knew how this would end. Let's clear him out. The auctioneer sighed, nodding to the gate crew. The crowd murmured, already turning their attention to the next lot. Someone cracked a joke about stew meat. Another lit a cigarette. The moment was slipping away, quietly, like a door being shut on something no one wanted to claim. And then, tap. It wasn't loud, just a cane striking the steel railing once. Then again, tap. The sound cut through the murmur like a match in a dark room. Heads turned. The old cowboy hadn't moved from his spot, but now his hand was raised, barely, just enough to stop the handler's mid-step, enough to make the auctioneer blink like he wasn't sure he'd heard right. "You making a bid, sir?" the auctioneer asked, his voice slower now, careful. Nobody ever bid this late. Not without a reason. The old man gave a single nod. No drama, no speech, just the quiet certainty of someone who didn't need to ask permission. The crowd chuckled at first, nervous laughter this time, not cruel, as if they weren't sure whether to be amused or unsettled. One man muttered, "He's gone soft in the head." Another whispered, "Guess he's collecting lawn ornaments now." But the cowboy didn't hear them, or didn't care. "How much?" the auctioneer asked, more out of habit than hope. The man reached into his coat, pulled out a folded bill, crumpled, creased, worn from years of being saved for something that mattered. He held it up. "Enough," he said. That was it. Not a number, not a negotiation, just enough. The auctioneer looked down at the bill, then back up at the horse, then at the man who'd somehow made the entire pen feel smaller. "Sold," he said softly. No gavel bang, no applause, just a sudden stillness, like everyone in the tent forgot how to breathe for a second. The horse didn't react. He stood where he was, watching the man through lashes thick with dust, and the man, he stepped forward, not quickly, not proudly, just forward. The crowd parted without being asked, some out of curiosity, some out of something closer to respect they didn't want to admit. He reached the pen, unlatched the gate, and walked in without hesitation. He didn't tug the rope or pat the horse, or try to reassure him. He just said, "Calm on, partner," and the horse followed. They walked slow, not because the horse limped. He didn't, but because that was the only speed that felt right. One hoof at a time, one boot at a time, each footfall stirring up a little more dust than the last. The sun hung low, the kind that makes shadows stretch long and thin across the road. Silas kept the rope loose, his cane tapping gently with each step. The horse, still unnamed, didn't pull, didn't wander, just followed. People noticed. It was hard not to. A boy on a rusted bike slowed to stare. A shopkeeper paused while sweeping her stoop. Two men outside the feed store stopped mid-sentence. The whispers came like wind through old grass, soft, cutting everywhere. "Is that Silas Rhodes? Didn't know he was still alive. What's he doing with that thing?" Most folks in town remembered the name, even if the man attached to it had long stopped showing up for anything that wasn't necessary. Silas had once been something: ranch foreman, bronc breaker, the kind of man other men tried to copy. But time, like weather, wears down even the tallest fences. After his wife passed and his last colt was buried, Silas just faded, a ghost with boots, and now here he was, walking the edge of Main Street with a crooked horse, like it was a parade. Some chuckled, some looked away, a few just watched, unsure if it was foolishness or something stranger, something they didn't have words for. Silas didn't respond to any of it, not the stares, not the silence. He just kept walking, head steady, eyes ahead. Every now and then he'd glance down at the horse beside him, not checking, not correcting, just seeing. The horse didn't need leading. His pace matched Silas's without being asked. No spooking, no dragging, just step, step, step. At the old crossing near the cemetery, a pickup slowed beside them. A young man leaned out. "You lose a bet, old-timer." Silas didn't stop, or just picking up parts for a new joke. Still, no reaction. The truck revved and rolled on. Dust curled in its wake. Silas paused, wiped a bit of grit from his lip, then tapped the cane twice against the pavement. "Not a joke," he muttered. The horse blinked, waiting. They turned off the main road just before the railroad tracks. The sidewalk ended, and the fields opened up, dry, golden, quiet. Silas's ranch sat out there, a forgotten stretch of land where the sky always felt a little too big. As they neared the gate, the horse hesitated, just for a second, then he stepped forward again. Silas opened the gate slow, like it mattered. "Welcome home," he said, and meant it. The gate creaked open like it hadn't moved in weeks. Maybe it hadn't. Weeds curled through the fence posts, and the paint on the welcome sign had long since faded to ghost letters. The kind of place time forgets unless someone reminds it. Silas walked through first. The horse followed without a tug. The ranch was simple, 3 buildings, none of them proud. The barn leaned slightly west from too many storms. The house was squat and square, its porch shaded more by habit than wood. Wind brushed through the dry grass, making it whisper stories no one had listened to in years. "Not much," Silas said as they crossed the yard, "but it holds together." The horse blinked at a rusted wheelbarrow and kept walking. Silas led him to the small corral near the barn, fence posts repaired with mismatched boards, water trough half full, a patch of shade that moved with the sun. He dropped the rope but didn't leave. Instead, he leaned on the fence, watching. The horse stood there, still and calm, his legs short and wide set like tree stumps. Everything about him looked stubborn, but there was no fight in him, no defiance, just a tired patience. The kind that comes from waiting too long without being seen. "You need a name," Silas said finally. "Can't just call you that once forever." He thought for a minute. Names carried weight, and he wasn't about to give this horse something fancy or borrowed. He looked at the animal's legs, the solid way he stood, like a piece of the earth. "Stub," he said. The horse flicked one ear. "Stub," Silas repeated, nodding. "Stubborn, solid, short end of the stick. Fits." The corral gate swung closed with a click. No lock, no hurry. Silas didn't bring out halters or lunging ropes or flags. He didn't whistle or snap or bark orders. He just sat on an overturned feed bucket, near enough to be seen, far enough not to crowd. Stub watched him. That was enough for day one. The sun sagged low behind the ridge. Shadows stretched like old bones across the yard. Silas stood, dusted off his knees, and filled the trough from a rusted spigot that sputtered like it had something to say. He left a small flake of hay inside the gate. Stub didn't rush it. Back at the house, Silas lit a single lamp and poured himself black coffee that tasted like the can it came from. He sat by the window, watching the yard, watching the horse. No noise, no applause, no plan. Just 2 old souls in a place too quiet to lie. Trust, he knew, didn't arrive like lightning. It grew in silence, and that he had plenty of. The days passed slow, like the wind that barely moved the grass out back. Stub didn't ask for anything, and Silas didn't expect much. They shared space, mostly. Morning feed, evening water, quiet watching in between. Some days Stub would stand in the same patch of dirt for hours, eyes half-lidded, body still. Other horses might have paced or whinnied or tested the fence. Not him. He just was. And maybe that's why Silas started remembering. It came back in pieces. Not loud, not sharp, just slow, like fog rising over fence lines. He'd been 28, foreman for a spread up in the Panhandle. Big cattle run, bigger egos. That season, the rains came late, and when they came hard. One drive turned into a disaster. Lightning cracking down through a gulch, cattle stampeding blind, mud deep enough to swallow boots whole. He'd been caught near the edge of a ridge, trying to turn a flank of panicked heifers, didn't see the drop till it gave under him. His horse, a compact, dun-colored gelding with legs like fence posts, never flinched, dug in, took the full weight of the slide, didn't throw him, didn't run, just stood and held, long enough for Silas to scramble clear. When he looked back, the ridge was gone, so was the horse. They searched the next day, after the storm passed, found broken gear, hoofprints that ended in nothing, no body, no blood, just absence. He didn't talk about it after that, but now, sitting near the corral, watching Stubb chew slow and deliberate, he saw it again, the shape of the shoulders, the way the head tipped just so when a bird landed nearby, the same silence, the same steadiness. It wasn't the same horse, couldn't be, but memory doesn't care much for logic. Sometimes it just shows you what it needs to. Silas stood at the fence, arms resting on the top rail. Stubb turned toward him, didn't move closer, didn't back away. "You remind me of someone," Silas said softly, "long gone, probably buried under some ridge no one visits." Stubb blinked. "That horse saved my life. Never got to thank him." The wind picked up, gentle but insistent. Silas reached out, not far, just enough to bridge the space if Stubb chose to close it. He didn't, not yet. Silas let his hand drop. "It's all right," he murmured. "I figure you came from a storm too." He turned back toward the house, his steps slow, steady, and a little heavier than before. Behind him, Stubb walked to the fence post, where Silas had stood, lowered his head, sniffed the old wood, and stayed there. The morning started with creaks, bones, wood, memory. Silas would rise before the sun got serious, boots dragging over the porch planks, coffee in hand, same route every day. Stubb would be waiting by the fence, not out of habit, but something quieter, like presence, like agreement. There were no halters, no spurs, no clickers or commands, just time. Silas would lean on the rail, sipping from a chipped mug, and talk about the weather or the neighbor's runaway goat, or the ache in his right hip. Stubb never interrupted. He just blinked slow and listened with that stillness that felt older than both of them. It took 3 days before Silas reached out, just a hand, palm open, low. Stubb didn't move, not forward, not away. That was the first win. On day 5, Silas brought out the old saddle blanket, not to use, just to let it sit on the fence. He left it there all day. Stubb sniffed it once and walked away. That was fine. Day 7, Silas walked into the corral and stood beside him, not close, not far. They stood like that for a while, breathing, matching. That was enough. Stubb wasn't broken. He was just unspoken, like a book no one had bothered to read. And Silas, for all his years and miles, had run out of use for breaking things. He wasn't trying to mold Stubb into anything. He just wanted to walk with him. So they did. Down the old irrigation trail, through yellow weeds and creaking gateposts, past a fence line that hadn't seen cattle in a decade. Silas didn't hold the rope tight. He didn't need to. Stubb walked beside him, not perfect, not polished, just present. The second time they made that loop, Stubb brushed his shoulder against Silas's arm, not rough, not flinching, just a bump, the kind you give someone you trust when words aren't the thing. The third time, they stopped halfway, under a bare cottonwood. Silas sat in the dirt, groaning as he lowered himself down. Stubb stayed standing, but close, close enough that his shadow fell across the old man's boots. "You don't owe me anything," Silas said one afternoon. "You just be who you are." Stubb flicked his ear and swatted a fly. That was answer enough. Every day didn't feel like progress. Some days they just existed near each other and watched the wind carry dust across forgotten fence lines. But there was a rhythm forming, old bones, slow steps, breathing in sync. Stubb didn't need fixing, and Silas didn't want a show horse. What they were building couldn't be named, but it was real, and it held. The flyer went up on a Tuesday, tacked to the bulletin board outside McKinley's Feed and Supply, flapping a little in the wind like even it wasn't sure it belonged there. Ridgeview Rodeo, oddball horse trial, 1 day only, mismatched, misfit, or just plain weird. Bring your horse and prove they're more than just a punchline. Most folks chuckled when they read it. A few kids snapped photos. Some ranch hands joked about entering goats in cowboy hats. Silas said nothing. He just stood by the board, reading it twice, then once more. His eyes didn't narrow, his mouth didn't twitch, but something in the set of his shoulders changed. The next morning, he rode into town on foot, Stubb beside him, hooves thudding soft against gravel. The sign-up table was in front of the town hall. Teenagers lounged nearby with clipboards and clip-on badges. Name? One asked without looking up. Silas scratched his chin. Rhodes. Silas. The teen squinted, finally noticing the horse. That the one you're bringing? He asked, trying to hide a smirk. Silas nodded. The kid shrugged and scribbled something down. You'll be up late afternoon. Crowd usually needs a laugh by then. Silas nodded again. We'll be ready. Word spread quick. Old man Rhodes is bringing that stumpy Mustang to the rodeo. I thought he was joking. He's serious. Signed up and everything. By Friday, people were already placing bets. Not on whether he'd win, but how long before Stubb tripped over his own feet. Silas didn't go to town again that week. He just walked the trail with Stubb, looped the old pasture, took long pauses by the fence line. He didn't train. Exactly. He didn't need to. What mattered wasn't showmanship. It was trust. The day of the rodeo arrived bright and loud, crowds piling in with folding chairs, sun hats and root beer floats. The announcer cracked jokes over the loudspeaker. Kids ran wild near the cotton candy stand. By the time the novelty trial rolled around, everyone was ready to laugh again. A spotted mule in a tutu went first, then a barrel-chested pony that trotted sideways. The crowd whooped and hollered, tossing popcorn at each other. Then came Stubb, dust-puffed as he stepped into the arena, slow and steady, with Silas at his side. No costume, no tricks, just an old cowboy and a squat plain Mustang. At first, the crowd snorted, then, quiet, because Stubb didn't hesitate, didn't buck, didn't stumble. He walked with the same calm he'd shown since the day they met. Silas walked beside him, not ahead, not behind, just with, and for reasons no one could name. The laughter died, not out of shame, out of respect. The course wasn't built to be cruel, but it was built to expose weakness. A narrow bridge, a curtain of flapping rags, a crooked tunnel made from rusted barrels. Nothing dangerous, just strange, just enough to rattle a horse that hadn't been tested. Stubb didn't blink. He stood at the starting line with dust on his coat, and his ears turned slightly back, not from fear, but focus. Silas stood beside him, hat low, hand loose on the lead. No saddle, no spurs, just trust. Whenever you're ready, the announcer called, trying to sound amused. Silas didn't answer. He just nodded once and took a breath like a man preparing for something sacred. They stepped forward. Stubb's hooves thudded softly over the packed dirt. The first obstacle was a tarp stretched across the ground, blue plastic, wrinkled and loud. Most horses balked, danced around it, snorted at the sound. Stubb sniffed it once, then walked across, slow and sure. The crowd murmured. Next came the barrels, scattered in a staggered line, tight enough to force sharp turns. Stubb didn't weave like a trained show pony. He just moved, deliberate, careful, one step at a time. His back legs lagged slightly behind the front, but he made the turn. No stumbles, no panic. Silas stayed close, never pulling, never pushing, just matching him. Like they were walking an old trail, only they remembered. At the curtain of rags, Stubb hesitated. The fabric fluttered like ghosts in a barn window. A breeze lifted a strand, brushed his cheek. He blinked, then walked through. The fabric parted like it had been waiting for him. Someone in the stands whispered, "He's not scared." Another voice said, "He's just steady." Near the final stretch, a young colt ahead had bucked and dumped his rider near the gate. Stubb stepped around the overturned cones, without so much as a glance. His pace didn't change. He moved like he remembered storms, like his legs had walked worse roads, like he knew what it meant to carry something fragile and not drop it. Silas didn't smile, didn't wave. He just walked beside him, jaw tight with memory. At the last marker, there was no gallop, no flourish. Stubb stepped over the finish line like it was any other patch of ground. Then he stopped, and Silas put a hand on his neck, just once. The crowd didn't cheer at first, they just watched. because somewhere between the tarp and the barrels and the flapping rags, it had stopped being funny and started being true. Every step mattered, and they'd taken every one of them together. They stood just past the finish line. No ribbons, no announcer shouting their names, no celebration waiting, just dust settling, and the faint squeal of a carnival ride off in the distance. Stubb lowered his head, not tired, just done, like a man who'd finished a long walk with no one waiting at the porch, but still glad he made it home. Silas exhaled, long and steady. He didn't look at the judge's table, didn't need to. The winners were already being tallied. A sleek roan with painted hooves, a flashy little mule that danced sideways through the curtain. That's what the crowd had come to see. But now they weren't laughing, they were watching. Stubb stood square, his short legs dusted, mane tangled, body shaped like someone made him from leftover pieces and old plans, but not a single person was snickering anymore. For a few long moments, nothing happened. Then clap, just one, slow, firm. Silas turned his head. It came from the back rail, where the ranchers usually stood chewing sunflower seeds and spitting opinions. The man clapping wore a clean hat, and a frown softened by something he didn't expect to feel. It was Levi Barton, the same man who once shouted across the feed store, "That horse looks like 2 cows gave up halfway." The same man who bet $1 that Stubb would fall before the first barrel. Now he was clapping, not loud, not for show, just honest. Another clap followed. Then another. A woman near the bleachers wiped something from her eye before adding her hands to the sound. The applause wasn't wild, it wasn't proud, it was quiet, like something being made right, slowly. Silas didn't bow, he didn't tip his hat, he just looked at Stubb and gave him a nod. "We did fine," he murmured. Stubb twitched an ear and flicked his tail once, like he agreed. They left the arena the same way they entered it, side by side. No rush, no rope held tight. The crowd parted, not to clear the way, but because something inside them told them to. No one called them heroes. No one needed to. Respect had crept in where ridicule used to live, and it settled in deep. That night, back at the ranch, Silas stood in the doorway with the stars above, and a blanket of quiet wrapped around him. He watched Stubb in the corral, standing under the moonlight, head lowered, still and calm. They hadn't won, but they'd finished, and sometimes, that's the victory that changes everything. The prairie was gold that evening, wide and quiet, with the kind of hush that settles in when the land remembers something important. Silas sat on the edge of the porch, boots planted firm, a tin cup of cooling coffee beside him. Stubb stood in the corral a few yards away, head lowered, tail swishing slow. The sun stretched long shadows between them, like threads tying old souls together. Neither of them spoke, not in the way the world measures words, but they understood the silence. The house behind him creaked with wind. A screen door clicked once, then settled. Somewhere out in the field, a hawk cried once, then disappeared into the evening sky. Silas reached into the chest pocket of his worn shirt and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the kind with careful creases and uneven edges. The envelope had dirt smudges and a child's handwriting that said only for Mr. Silas and Stubb. He'd found it tucked under the front gate when they returned from town. He opened it slowly, like it was something sacred. Inside was a note written in pencil, pressed hard into the page. "I saw you and Stubb at the rodeo. My brother laughed, but I didn't. I think you were the best ones. You didn't yell or go fast. You just kept going. I want to be like that. I want to be like you. Jake, age 9. Silas stared at the words for a long while, not blinking, not moving. Then slowly, he smiled. Just a flicker at the corner of his mouth, like a match being struck in the dark. He folded the letter back up, slid it into his pocket like it belonged there. "Then walk slow," he said aloud. His voice a soft rasp, and mean it. Stubb lifted his head. They didn't need crowds or ribbons, didn't need to win anything to matter. That kid saw what most folks miss, the quiet kind of strength, the kind that doesn't look for applause. Silas stood, knees aching the way they always did at sundown. He walked to the fence and leaned against it, arms crossed over the top rail. "Guess we left more behind than dust, huh, partner?" Stubb stepped a little closer, nudged his nose against Silas's sleeve, then stayed there. The sky turned a deeper blue, the stars starting to blink awake, one by one. Out in the darkening fields, the wind whispered over dry grass and old stones, carrying a new kind of story. One not built on speed or shine, but step after steady step. Silas looked out across the land and nodded to no one in particular. Because sometimes what still matters is who's still walking beside you. If this story moved you, don't let it stop at the last sentence. Share it with someone who's ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or quietly strong. Because sometimes the ones who walk slow and mean it are the ones who change everything. Subscribe to Horse Tales of Wonder for more powerful stories like this one. Drop a comment and tell us, have you ever met a stub in your life? Don't forget to like, share, and turn on notifications. We walk every step with you.